Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day when it comes to our deep dive for notes receivable. And before we jump into the exercises, just wanted to quickly highlight some things when it comes to accounting for notes receivable. So, for notes receivable, please make sure that you're still familiar and you still master accounting for receivables in general, right? So, huwag niyo pa rin pakawalan your mastery over accounts receivable, your mastery about your financial ratios. Because again, in terms of the quiz, the focus and the emphasis would be on notes receivable. But then, syempre, the expectation is after you've taken your accounts receivable, then you'll be able to answer even if my AR portion, my NR portion, and how you can understand the whole problem in terms of like a comprehensive format. So like what I mentioned, for the quiz, I'm already stressing this. For the quiz, the two focus would be your notes receivable and also your financial ratios for your AR. So I think the exercises are very representative naman in terms of like what you can expect. So as long as you fully understand the reason why we're able to arrive with the answers in the exercises, I think you're in a good place, right? But before anything else, let's just quickly review some of the key concepts for notes receivable. So number one, notes receivable is part of trades receivable because they usually arise from sale transactions, right? So the difference between notes receivable and accounts receivable is that notes receivable has a formal what? Has a formal instrument of credit, and it usually has two parties. Yung issuer, basically the one writing the promissory note. So basically at the start of the transaction, the issuer will receive cash and then they will have notes payable. So we're in the perspective of the payee. So as a payee, you'll have a notes receivable, and in turn, what you expect is not only will you get the principal amount, so basically the stated number in the face, but also a portion of the interest, depending on the number of terms, right? And in terms of this, again, I'm gonna stress that a promissory note is what? A written promise to pay a specified amount of money on demand or at a definite time. So a notes receivable can still be payable on demand or payable on a certain date, right? So it could be payable on demand, meaning kung siningil na natin, then we can collect. Or it could also be payable at a specific time, meaning parang a specific date, or based on a specified term. So yun yung usually nandun sa exercises because that's the most complicated, right? So again, notes receivable can be payable on demand, can be payable at a specified amount of time, or can be payable at a specified number of terms, right? So with that said, we're gonna jump into kagad the five components, right? Through the exercises. So the first exercise that I'll be tackling would be the one that will show us the usual journal entries or the typical flow for notes receivable. And then from there, we'll jump into na parang yung solving component. And then finally, putting it all together in the comprehensive problem. So first, again, for notes receivable, let's first master journal entries. And the exercise that we created to make sure that you understand the journal entries would be the scarlet and violet example. So brief exercise 9.10. So for this actually very straightforward. Just want you to appreciate what usually happens. What are the important journal entries every time magkakaroon ng notes receivable, right? So in scenario in the required A, basically they were asking lang, how do you record a journal entry when it comes to the particular issuance, right? So for the particular issuance for Violet Co. So for this particular instance, there would be two journal entries that's you can derive from this statement. Now on October 1, basically they sold the game and then initially they recorded an accounts receivable. So in essence, on October 1, you had the debit AR, credit sales revenue. But then it also said na on November 1, Violet Co. gave Scarlett a 10% 5-month promissory note. So meaning, basically, si Violet Co., hindi pala siya nakabayad ng AR. So now, nilipat from accounts receivable to a notes receivable yung account niya or yung utang niya because they issued a promissory note. And in terms of the journal entry, when you transfer your AR to your notes receivable, then it's a direct forward journal entry. Debit notes receivable, credit accounts receivable. Now, for this particular scenario, there's also gonna be a hidden thing. Kasi usually, after this statement, going back to the required, they're gonna be asking you na, in scenario 1, if it was dishonored, but there's an expected collection, and scenario 2, there is dishonored and then there's no expected collection. But I want to stress that every time you see a notes receivable, always think, tumama ba tayo sa end of the period? And again, I'm gonna stress that the end of the period does not necessarily mean December 31. It could be an end of the month, end of the quarter. So please read the problem. So every time nagkakaroon ka ng notes receivable, ang knee-jerk reaction mo would be, did we cross an end of the period? Because if we cross an end of the period, then we have to account for what? For the interest receivable, right? And therefore, just to double check, we're gonna be calculating using the monthly formula, right? So in essence, let's go about this. Let's solve for what are the things that we're looking for. And again, I'm gonna stress that there are only 4 things that you always, or technically 5, that you only look for sa notes receivable. The first one would be your term, so how long it is. The second one would be the face value. The third would be the total interest of the note. The fourth would be the interest receivable na you accrue if ever it crosses over 2 periods. And then yung interest income. So 5 lang, right? So let's go back to the first scenario and look at how we're gonna be solving this. So 120,000 is the face value. Then it said 10% 5 months. So we have 10% and 5 months. And then from here, we can solve for the yearly interest. So step 1, get the yearly interest. The yearly interest is 12,000 because 120 times 10%. And then we want to get the monthly interest so that we can prorate accordingly. So year in months is 12. So 12,000 divided by 12, 1,000 yung monthly interest. Now, it's a 5-month promissory note. So at the end, we expect that the total interest for this particular note would be 5,000. And then, tumawid ba siya ng end of the period? According to the problem, yes. Kasi tumawid siya to December. So now we have to compute. When was the notes receivable issued? So the first trick question here was, you'd think October 1 because nakabenta siya. But if you read closely, the note receivable was issued not on October 1, but on November 1. Therefore, the 5 months will start on November 1. So now we count. How many months to December? November, December. 2 months. So 2 out of the 5 months, there's an interest receivable. And then the 3 months after December, that would be interest income. So 2 times 1,000, you have 2,000 interest receivable. 3 times 1,000, 3,000 interest income. If you add both of them, it makes sense. 2,000 plus 3,000, it would be 5,000 notes receivable, or total interest for the note, right? So with that in mind, we have this. There is a hidden event, which is the end of the period. So we should have a journal entry also na interest receivable, credit interest revenue of 2,000. For that particular problem. Now, let's go na to the 2 given. So there's 2 scenarios of dishonoring the NR. The first one was an expected collection and the second one was no collection. As you can see in the given, hindi naman explicit whether they're expected collection or not expected collection. But you can guess from the given na in scenario 1, they promise they will pay once they receive settlement. So they're just waiting for a pending case, right? Yung second, they vehemently refused to pay because they didn't like how the open world experience was buggy, right? So therefore, like what I've mentioned, in the two scenarios for dishonoring, literally, if you have the four values that you have, which is basically the face value and these three components of interest, you'll be able to write your dishonor for expected collection. So this one, scenario A, is if you still expect collection. If you still expect collection, all of the things that's related to the note will be transferred back to accounts receivable, right? So, yung previous note receivable, yung previous interest receivable, kasama siya, right? And also, the interest revenue from the 3 months in that year will also be included. So see, if there's expected collection, kasama si interest income. If there's expected collection, kasama si interest income. In comparison, if there's no expected collection, then you ignore the interest income. Why? Because if you don't expect to collect them, we're gonna start treating it as an impairment. We're gonna start treating it as an expense. It doesn't make sense to recognize a revenue pa when ine-expense mo na nga yung previously recorded na revenue, right? And therefore, when it's dishonored and there's no expected collection, then the journal entry will simply be ABA to represent the impairment for your notes receivable, which is 120,000, and then partner siya ni notes receivable. And then yung previously recorded mong interest receivable na 2,000, you partner with other expenses. So basically, that's the whole scenario. The reason why mahirap si notes receivable is probably in a given scenario, they'll probably give you a lot of notes receivable. But on a per note receivable basis or on a per promissory note basis, it's very simple, right? So my suggestion is, huwag kayong matakot. Honestly, when I was taking up 99.1, 99.2, every time I see a bond payable or notes payable, my mindset was, hindi, bigay ko na lang. Parang, I'll fail that. Kasi, I wasn't confident about computing for interest, etc., etc. But then now, after 114 or after graduating, I realized it's really more about how organized you are in interpreting the data. So number one, the reason why we gave 9.10 is that we wanted to show na honestly, there are only like 3 journal entries related to one promissory note, right? There's gonna be the issuance, there's probably gonna be like computing for the interest accrued, and then either my collection or my dishonor. So wag kayong matakot. As long as clear naman sa inyo yung concepts, then it's very straightforward. Now, the complication will come in 2 things. Number 1, if hindi kayo marunong mag-compute ng interest, or number 2, nalunod kayo sa sobrang dami na binigay. And therefore, the next 2 exercises aims to help you master it, right? So let's go to the first thing. Let's master computing for interest, right? But before I proceed to the next exercise, are there any questions for Scarlett and Violet Company? Kenny, thumbs up if everything's okay. Okay. Clear. So now, we go to computing the interest. And in computing the interest, honestly, we have the RRC Punch company. And basically, they gave you a table na butas, right? When you think about it, you can divide the table into 2 chunks. The first table is all about determining the term or the maturity date. The date of the note, the terms, and the maturity date is all about the dates. The next 5 columns is all about computing the interest. So same lang, different format, right? So again, pag marami kayong nakitang blank, you'll probably get overwhelmed. But the reason why I split it in mable is so that you can take it one note at a time, right? So basically, if you notice, there are segmentations. The first 3 notes are terms in months. The next 3 notes are terms in days. And then, and then pare-pareho lang naman sila ng missing. Na si Ray and si Rose have the same missing. Si Azul and si Celerina has the same missing. And then si Christina and si Julian has the same missing. Right? Kasi, limited naman yung pwedeng parang limited naman yung pwede nang tanggalin for you to be able to complete or solve for the missing, right? So I think comprehensive naman all of the things that might be taken away and for you to reverse engineer. So please master this question because again it will help you be proficient in terms of computing for interest. For me, if super gets nyo to, then you don't have anything to worry about when it comes to notes receivable. So please, 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 I know it's easy or it sounds easy na parang when I present it on PowerPoint format or when you've solved it in Oble because ilang beses nyo na tinry. But again, I urge you that before the quiz, try to do this again, both manually and in terms of like any template in Excel that you have. And then just make sure na you get the right answers, right? Because this will really be the thing that will make or break your notes receivable. Because if you don't know how to compute for interest, even if you know the journal entries, diba? Parang sayang rin naman, right? So with that said, let's proceed to the first note. So the Ray note. So the things that are missing would be the maturity date and all of the interest components. So actually, this is the simplest scenario. Let's first go to maturity date. It's a 10-month note, right? So if it's a 10-month note and it was issued in June 30, basically, we just count July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So April 30 or pwede rin namang May 1, right? So the more correct answer is April 30, but again, I just wanted to highlight that the end of the period is just synonymous to the start of the period, right? April 30, May 1, it's just a 1-day difference, right? So the more correct answer here is April 30, but as you can see in Novele, I purposely made this blank so that you just understand, right? Kasi usually, maraming nalilito na parang yung end of the period is also equal to the start of the period, right? So with that said, basically, I inputted lang everything that was given for this particular problem, right? So we have 840,000. Right? So we have 840,000. I plugged it this. We have 2% interest and we have 10 months. So let's solve. So alam natin si May 1. So 840,000 times 2% would be 16,800. Now 16,800 divided by 12 would give you a monthly interest of 1,400. And therefore, 1,400 times 10 months would be 14,000. So we have 14,000. Now, how do we break down that 14,000, right? So we're in June right now. So we have to count all the way to the end of the period, which is December 31. So we have June, so July, August, September, October, November, December. So 6 months. So 6 months, we accrue for the interest, and then the remaining 4 months from January to April will be interest income. So 6 times 1,4 is 8,400. So that would be our interest receivable. And 4 times 1,4 is the interest income at 5,600. So again, this is straightforward. So this is usually what you can expect naman. Na binigay sa inyo yung face value, that the interest and the note, right? So 80% of notes receivable, ganito naman yung format, right? Very straightforward. You solve linearly. Now, to show na or to help you master this, I wanted to make sure that you will be able to solve for the face value if it's not given, right? So let's look at the Celerina note. So the Celerina note runs from May 30 to Jan 31. So the very first thing that you ask yourself is, what is the term of the note in months? So it's in May. So you have June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, right? So therefore, there are 8 months. So we have 8 months. And then, ano yung mga alam natin? Alam natin 5% yung note alam nating 12 months naman in order to get monthly interest, and we know that the term is 8 months, right? Ang binigay lang sa atin is the interest receivable of 8,750. So, weird. Parang it's hard to solve for the missing, right? Sorry. Sorry. 11:05. Sorry. Is it visible now? Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Kanina pa ba? Or... Okay.
Nung
Sorry.
nag-start po yung maturity date.
Okay. Nakita niyo ba yung rain note or hindi rin?
Hindi po, sir.
Okay, sorry. So, we'll be able to show naman the other one, yung sa in days. But, sorry. Thank you so much. Sorry, hindi ko nakita yung chat. Kindly tell me rin if hindi nakita. Pero now, kita niyo na. Right? Can everyone see? Okay, sorry. So, we have 8 months. And then, pinlog in natin to 5%, 8 months. Right? So, basically, alam na natin yung note for Celerina, and then alam natin yung interest receivable. Now, it looks hard because how can we solve for the face value or the total interest using 8,750? This is where the understanding kicks in. We know that the interest receivable represents the interest that you have for the year. So, we have to count how many months pa from May to the end of the period, which is December. So, in essence, if it's an 8-month note, so June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 7 months. So, the very first thing that we know is that the interest receivable represents 7 months worth of interest. So now, how do we get monthly interest? 8,750 divided by the 7 months is that we know 1,250 yung monthly interest. Right? And then, kung 7 months to, we know that December to January, may 1 month na lang. Therefore, 1,250 yung interest income. Right? So, alam na natin yung expected interest income in the next year or in the next period. So, the next thing that we can solve for is that alam na natin yung both components, so we know the total interest of the note, which is just basically 8,750 plus 1,250 is equal to 10,000, right? And then finally, so alam na natin yung total interest income. Now, the last thing is the notes receivable. So, how do we solve for the notes receivable? Well, we solve pataas, right? Pataas. So, we have 1,250 monthly interest. So, let's look for its annual interest. So, 1,250 times 12 is 15,000, right? And then, the last step is 15,000 divided by 5% is equal to 300,000. So, that gets your, gives you your notes receivable. So, clear? So, feel free to ask any questions kung, yeah. If there are things na hindi malinaw, feel free to unmute or feel free to chat in the comments, right? So, that's how you solve for pag missing si notes receivable and then binigay lang sa inyo yung isang component ng interest. So, ang importanteng ma-take away sa inyo is, if hindi binigay si face value, don't worry, just master how to solve for it backwards, right? And then, the last scenario for monthly is, paano kung wala naman si interest rate? Ito naman, ang importante is, how do you solve for the interest rate, right? So again, this is how you solve for it. First, let's focus muna on the maturity terms, right? So, if it's a February note, and then the term of the note is 7 months. So, we just count backwards, right? In February, the 7 months there is July, right? So, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. 7 months, right? Next, let's look for the 3 missing pa. So we plug in the notes receivable of 240,000, the total interest income of 11,200, and the 7 months. So now, the very first thing is that we can solve for the monthly interest by looking at the total interest of the note. we know that 11,200 represents 7 months worth. So in order to get monthly interest, we can do 11,200 divided by 7 is equal to 1,600. So 1,600 yung monthly interest. And then, since alam na natin yung monthly interest, we can solve pataas, right? So 1,600 times 12 will get the annual interest of 19,200. And then after the 19,200, we can get the interest rate, which is just basically 19,200 divided by 240,000 is equal to 8%. So alam na natin yung 8%. And then, madali na lang to, right? Yung 11,200, we just need to prorate through the two components of interest. So how many months to December? July, August, September, October, November, December, 6 months, right? So we have 6 months. So 6 months times the 1/6 monthly interest would be 9,600. And then finally, the 1 month is 1,600, right? So that's how we're able to solve, right? So other things to note before we proceed to the next three. Look at July 1. If it's July 1, look, I want to emphasize na I start the count on July, right? So July 1, if the date of the note is July 1, then it's July, August, September, October, November, December. 6 months to December. But if it's July 30, you start the count in August, right? So kung July 30 yan, there's only 5 months to December. So other things to note, right? So yun. And then, basically, as long as alam nyo na yung how to solve for the missing face value, how to solve for the missing interest, and how to solve for the interest, then madali na lang lahat, right? The next complication na lang is if it's in days, right? So how about if the terms are in days? So we'll again go through 3 different scenarios, but then the terms will be on days, right? So in the Rose note, it's a term of the note is 120 days. And hindi natin alam again yung maturity date. So how do we solve for this? Basically, we just count. Dito papasok yung knuckle, right? So now, we need to know ano ba yung end, how many days are there in the months of October, etc., etc. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. So October is 31. And again, another thing I always use is October is 31, November is 30, December is 31. So 31, 30, 31 yung October, right? So now, we just basically do 31 minus 9 is 22, and then you just solve. And then you know that the maturity date would be February 6, right? That's 120 days. So, kindly ask me na lang if hindi nyo na-gets how we arrive with February 6, right? But generally, you just basically 31 minus 9 is 22, and then you add the end of the months until malapit na siya magsobra. So pag malapit na siya magsobra, you just get the remaining partial dates in February. Okay, so now that we know that 120 days siya, the next thing we solve for would be the daily interest. 12% of 750 gives you 90,000. Now, 90,000 can be divided by 360 or 365. But, yung 360, yung sabi ng problem. So, 90 divided by 360 is, you have a daily interest of 250. So now, the total interest is basically just 250 times 120 days, 30,000. Now, the only two missing are yung proration. So how did I know na 83 days to December? Because I just looked at my schedule, right? 22 plus 30 plus 31 is 83 days. And then, 120 minus 83, 37. So 83 to December, 37 yung remaining. So now, 83 times the daily interest of 250 will give you 20,750, and 37 times daily interest of 250 is 9,250, right? So here, moving on to Azul note. So Azul note, again, it's in days. And then ang importante lang dito is missing si notes receivable. So again, alam na natin how to solve for it. So it's just applying the logic that we applied in Celerina, right? So first, the term of the note. It's September 17 to March 16. We solve for how do you get September 17 to March 16? Well, again, do the knuckle. And alam natin 31 si October. So September is 30. So 30 minus 17 is 13. And then if you solve properly, you'll get 180 days, right? So ito yung computation. Now we know that the term of the note is 180 days. Now, if the total interest of the note, right? Sorry. So basically, we start with 10,500, right? How did we arrive with the total interest of the note here, right? So 10,500, how many days till the end of the period, right? So that would be what? 105 days. How did I arrive with 105 days? We start from September 17. So the 13 days in September plus the 31 days in October plus 30 days in November plus 31 in December. 105 days. So I know that this is 105 days, 10,500. So the 10,500 interest represents 105 days worth of interest. So to get the daily interest, it's 10,500 divided by 105 is equal to 100. So we know that the daily interest is 100. 100 times 180, that's why it's 18,000. Now, yung 75 days, that's just basically 75 days times 100 is 75, right? So now we have the expected interest of 7,500. And then ito, 10,500 plus 7,500 is 18,000. So we know this already. So the last is, how do we solve for the missing face value? We solve pataas. 100 times 360. So the daily interest of 100 times 360 days in a year is 36,000, and then 36,000 divided by 10% is 360,000. Right? So alam na natin the notes receivable. Last, yung missing is the interest rate. And then it's in days. So how do we do about it again? Number one, we know that the date is 30. And then January 17. So how many days in December? Kailangan 13 days. And therefore, 31 minus 13 is December 18. Right? So alam na natin yung anything to do with the maturity. So how do we solve for this? First is, we know that the 600 total interest of the note represents 30 days. So 600 divided by 30 is equal to the 20 daily interest. And then, now that we know the daily interest, we solve upwards. 20 times 360 is 7,200. 7,200 divided by 180,000 is 4%. So alam natin yung 4%, right? And then this one is just knowing the number of days. This is 13 days in December. So 260 kasi 20 times 13 days is 260. And then finally, 17 days times 20 is 340. Right? So basically, it looks complicated, but as long as you know how to solve for it naman, per note, then it's very manageable. Right? So another tip, usually, binibigay yung total ni notes receivable. Now, confident kayo if the terms in months. Pero hindi kayo confident sa terms in days. One way to go, or parang to compensate for that, parang hindi kayo confident, is that you total everything and then kuwari si 360 na lang yung missing, right? So if you total everything and then subtract it from 2.6 million, you'll arrive with 360. And then it will help you, it will guide yung missing. So, ganun. If in the problem merong binigay na total and then hindi kayo confident on how to reverse engineer, make sure na it makes sense. Na if you total everything, it should total 2.67 million. Right? Are there any questions in computing for interest? Kindly thumbs up if everything's okay. Go Russ. May tanong ata. Yeah, go ahead.
Ano lang sir, like, paano, if leap year po ba, like, sasabihin nila if like February 29 yung ikaw, or default na
Yeah.
28 po talaga siya?
Good. Correct. So, I think naman na if ever it comes up in the quiz or in the exam, it will explicitly be stated if it's leap year. So, pero the general is 28 days, right? And then we'll just say kung 29 or 28, right? So you can clarify naman.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So I think if everything's clear, the last thing that we do for notes receivable is let's master comprehensive problems. And to be fair, I think naman around 2 to 3 attempts, people were soon able to understand the computation. Now yung comprehensive problem, I think it was very challenging for everyone because ang dami niya, number one. And then, second, puro ending balance yung hiningi, right? So, I don't know how you solve for this, but I will share you a way for me, the way I use in order to parang divide this chunk of text into parang something na I can understand, right? And basically, just to share with you my strategy, number one, alam ko kasi that the required is balances. So rather than hyper-focusing on journal entries, what I first want to do is to create a table of receivables na I'll show you later. Second, maraming nangyayari here na ang daming companies like si Sochi, si Atom, si Nivay, si Blue, si Cora. Right? Then paiba-iba and then lahat sila notes receivable. And then kukumpute ko yung interest tapos malilito ako, right? So rather than tackling it chronologically, I'm gonna tackle it per company, per promissory note. Meaning, I'll look, okay, si January 5 is a Sochi transaction. So I'll look for Sochi transaction. So January 20. Si Feb 18 is not a Sochi transaction, so I'll ignore first and then go to the final Sochi transaction, which is the collection of the note. So I'm gonna do it on a per promissory note, per company basis. Para mas madali yung solving ko. Kasi ako, I'm the type of person na parang nalilito na ako pag paiba-iba or paiba-iba yung company. Tapos, ito pala related dito. So, this is one way of solving. I can show you another way through Excel, another way of solving for this. But in this particular scenario, I will go through it per company. So, step one. Okay. So, basically, the balances are in receivables, right? So, the table, I broke it down into what are the things that can affect my total receivables. So there's only 4 things I care about in this problem. What is my accounts receivable? What's my ADA? Because in order to solve for my net AR, I need my ADA. What's my notes receivable and what's my interest receivable? So step 1 is I just plug in the beginning. So notes receivable 25. So I plug it in. Interest receivable of 187.50, and then ADA of 13,200, right? Next step is I will now go to the transactions. So sold to Sochi company, basically that is just debit AR, credit sales revenue. May anong na-affect na receivable component? May AR, right? So I plug it in, plus 20,000. Next, since si Sochi company, I will look for other things that talk about Sochi company. So, si January 20 still talks about Sochi. And according to this, they accepted a 20,000 3-month 8% note receivable. So, yung AR naging NR. So, notes receivable, debit, credit, AR of 20,000. So now, how will this affect my table? Plus 20,000 on my notes receivable, pero minus 20,000 in my accounts receivable. The last would be in February 80, in April, just to end the whole Sochi transaction, they collected the note in April 20. So now we solve for the interest. So I will leave it up to you to look at the Excel on how we solve for the interest. But the journal entry here is this. debit cash, and then you have an interest income of 400. So how will this affect our table? Minus 20,000 in notes receivable, minus 20,000 in April 20, and then minus, and then yung interest income na 400, wala naman siyang effect kasi hindi naman siya interest receivable, right? So wala siyang effect. Next, we go na to Atom Company. So si Atom Company, nag-issue siya ng notes receivable in exchange for a sales revenue. So how will this affect our table? Magkakaroon ng plus 8,000 in the notes receivable section, right? And then, the next transaction is, nag-receive na siya ng payment in full. So we just solve for the interest again, and then, note the collection. So, minus 8,000 na notes receivable, and then yung interest income will not have any effect in our receivables total, right? So, minus 8,000 lang, right? So, we're done now with two companies. We're done with Sochi, we're done with Atom. Next, Nivay Company. Nivay Company, ito yung nasa beginning of the year. Kaya, 25,000 and may 187.50 na interest receivable. So, when we collect, it's just gonna be 25,000 and then may interest receivable of 187.50. So, magsusubtract ng 25,000 in notes receivable and 187.50 here. So, we're done with three companies, Sochi, Nivay, Atom. What are the other companies? Si Blue. Si Blue here. So, si Blue issued a notes receivable in settlement of a past due. So, it's NRAR. Debit notes receivable, credit accounts receivable. So now, may plus 6,000 kay notes receivable, pero may minus 6,000 kay accounts receivable, right? And then, ano nangyari? The last thing is nag-dishonor, pero may expected collection. So how do we write the journal entry? Debit AR of 6,105, which is composed of the notes receivable and the interest income. So now what will happen? We will subtract 6,000 in notes receivable, but add not 6,000, but 6,105 in your accounts receivable, right? So yung interest income again does not affect our receivables, right? So the last is si Cora. So Cora Company is just straightforward, notes receivable, sales revenue, but please, hindi sinabi sa problem or wala sa events, but there is a hidden journal entry which is what is the interest receivable at the end. So now, the last two inputs in our table would be 12,000 and 400. So if you total everything, so note na I wrote kung ano yung mga affected companies. So you'll get an accounts receivable total of 139,105, 12,000 notes receivable, and 400 interest receivable. So 139 minus 13,200 plus 12,000 plus 400 is the net receivable of 138,305, right? So again, it looks confusing, but then if you segment it per company, if you segment it per promissory note, then it's much doable, right? So with that said, we're done with the three. And then the last would be yung Karasuno, right? And for Karasuno, honestly, it's just very straightforward na. So si Karasuno, had a bunch of things that were provided for you. Now, my suggestion for everyone is please just make a table rather than just journalizing. Kasi, mas straightforward siya. So, basically, you plug in the beginning 884 minus 34,000 ADA for Karasuno. And then sales, increase AR, so plus 12 million. Collections, decrease AR, so minus 12.9. Write-offs, decrease AR but increase ADA, or sorry, debit ADA, credit AR to, right? So usually, credit siya kaya siya minus 34. So this is a debit, so 10,000, 10,000. And then a bad debt expense is a credit, so 40,000. If you sum all of this, and then you sum all of this, you'll arrive with the ending balance of 660,000. Now, ano yung mahirap dito? AR turnover is just net credit sales, net credit sales. So again, please be careful. Pag binigay sa inyo gross, you have to subtract sales revenue, sales return and allowance, sales discount, right? But ito, we're lucky, net credit sales is given. Second, AR average, meaning you need to get the beginning balance and the ending balance of your AR, and then you average it. Now, anong AR? AR net. So, AR minus ADA sa beginning, 884 minus 34 is 850. That's your beginning balance. Ending is 724 minus 64 is 660. 850 plus 660 divided by 2 is your AR average of 755,000. You divide this, so net credit sales over AR average, net yun, net, which gives you 16.89 AR turnover. And then now that you now have your AR turnover, 360 divided by R2 would be 21.32. Or if you round to the nearest days, 21 days. And then honestly, Nekoma is just the same, right? Like you have a 1.4, so basically the same effects lang. So again, ang importante dito is you average your AR. So 936 minus 86 and 1.4 million minus 300, 1.1. And then you have net credit sales divided by AR average is 13.59 R2. And then 360 divided by 13.59 is 26 days in collection. So that ends our AR exercises. So don't worry, I will give you this Excel sheet. And since I give you this Excel sheet, you'll also get yung parang mga templates I use in order to solve. Again, please don't be overly reliant on this. Kindly let me know kung may mali sa formulas, but I will leave it up to you to double check kung tama siya using manual computation in our class discussion. And then again, please on the quiz, okay, fine, use the template or use Excel to double check kung tama yung solving nyo ng notes receivable, but please know how to solve for it manually because sa exams, mapapagod kayo na manual nyo sinusolve. Pag overly reliant kayo on the Excel, you'll not be practiced for the exams na marami. Like, di ba, alam niyo naman kung gaano karami yung short problem. So, the more you compute it, the more na you master. Right? And then, as promised, this is also parang the journal entries. So, another way of solving for yung comprehensive problem is, I did it chronologically, pero I had separate papers. So, nauna to, and then pumunta ako dito, and then ganito. So, the idea here is, you can do it chronologically, you can do it per company, pero separate your journal entries per company. Right? So, this chunk is Sochi. This chunk is blue. Atom. This chunk is blue. This chunk is Cora, and then this chunk is Nivite. So, you can do it chronologically, but then make sure na you just separate the information para hindi kayo malito, right? So, are there any questions before we end today's lecture? Is everything clear naman so far?
Sir,
Yeah.
concern lang po sa Necoma. Parang iba po kasi yung yung ADA na binigay sa UPLA dun po sa kaninang pinakita.
Okay. Sige. Sorry.
Kaya wrong yung sa UPLA po na.
Okay. I will double check that one. Yeah. But I think sa OVLE,
Yung sa UPLA, sir, 12,000 yung ADA. Tapos dyan po, 86,000. Kaya iba po yung sagot na nakuha namin.
okay. Got it. Yeah. Sige. We'll just correct that one. Apologies. Thank you so much for pointing it out. Yeah.
Sir.
Mm-mm. Are there any other questions for this? So yun, actually, again, so I don't know if you were able to note, pero like what I mentioned, for those that have been relying on Valix also for cash, 'di ba very helpful siya. But again, reminder to everyone, sa receivables, yung helpful chapters lang would be BDE and ADA estimates. The rest, like for examples for notes receivable, um, it's different. So please don't rely on this. So for those na, parang want a lot of exercises, for me, it's not the number, pero please make sure you know how to solve the 4 exercises na we discussed alongside the lecture discussion. And then everything naman, you'll be able to get from the discussion. Yun. So, actually, we're entering December. So, actually, malapit na Christmas break. So, final reminders. So, you have your quiz. So, 3 more quizzes, right? One quiz, notes receivable Monday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Kindly let me know kung merong conflicts. And then, next week, we'll enter PPE. So, we'll have PPE, one quiz on PPE, and then one quiz on mineral resources. So, for me, let's finish AR strong. If you finish AR strong, you have 3 out of 5 quizzes na mataas na. So I think that will put you in a really good position come PPE. And then, ano pa ba? And then again, reminder for exercises, please submit online and email just for it to count para lang I can give you the whole 10% participation for the SEM. And then, I will give an update next week kung we'll have the Tuesday and Thursday class. Definitely we'll have the Tuesday na Zoom meeting, meaning sabay, parang the usual. Pero sa Thursday, baka we can go, we'll have asynchronous kasi I think there's a conflict in schedule, on my schedule. But I will, in return, I will post the video during class time. So, meaning, just please watch it na lang during class time, pero it won't be live, right? So I have another important thing lang during that time. But definitely if you want to consult, feel free naman to schedule sa calendar, right? So if there are no more questions, thank you so much everyone. Have a great day. If anyone have any questions pa sa akin or if you want to consult, I'll stay in a few minutes rin. So we can discuss if you have anything on your mind. Yeah. Thank you.